What's going on, everybody? It's your favorite Grey boy, Brendan, and we're back with another episode of the GreyCast. I just want to talk a couple of minutes Star Wars, where we are at this point with Star Wars news and what I think / hope it could mean for the future of the, television and film franchise. So I'm just going to dive right in. There's been a lot of articles going around the last day or two that apparently for the Ahsoka Disney Plus series, which yet has no estimated release date. It hasn't even begun production or filming or anything. But according to a lot of articles, the more, they keep popping up now. Just like we had when Rosario Dawson was rumored to be cast for Ahsoka, we now have rumored casting choices for both the characters of Grand Admiral Thrawn and Ezra Bridger. So at this point, according to these articles, Thrawn is actually going to be played by Lars Mikkelsen, who voiced Thrawn in seasons 3 and 4 of Rebels, which I think is a great casting choice. There might be other actors that might look a little bit more like Thrawn, but Mikkelsen is the only person who's ever technically played him before, so he has the experience. And plus, Thrawn doesn't have a natural human face, he has a unique bone structure for his species, so that's nothing that the Star Wars makeup team can handle, and I'm sure they'll make him look perfect. And the other casting announcement, whether or not this is true, is that Ezra Bridger is going to be played by Mina Massoud. His biggest role, he played Aladdin in the Disney live-action version of Aladdin, so it kind of makes sense to keep him within the, Disney family. This has been happening with a lot of actors lately where they might, do a Disney movie and then they get to do a Pixar voice or vice versa. We have seen it, not with every actor, but sometimes that happens. And he definitely looks enough like Ezra, so I think it's a good choice. Works for me, I'm not complaining. The show is supposed to take place, Ahsoka, around the same time as Mandalorian. It's gotta probably take place right after when we last saw Ahsoka, when she was asking the, was it the Duchess? I forget her title. If you look it up, it's Bruce Lee's actual goddaughter that played the Asian woman that Ahsoka fought in the episode The Jedi of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. And, it ended with Ahsoka beating her in combat and right away just asking, where is Grand Admiral Thrawn? Now, Thrawn was last seen with Ezra at the end of Season 4 of Rebels when they went into somewhere in the unknown regions of the galaxy, and I know Rebels ends with Ahsoka and Sabine deciding to go out and search for Ezra. Obviously, in the, however many years between Rebels ending and A New Hope beginning to this point in The Mandalorian, they couldn't find him, so you're going at least 5+ years they couldn't find them. But I know in Heir to the Empire that Thrawn was basically missing throughout a lot of those movies, that he was in the unknown regions, so it makes sense. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is that maybe after all this time, maybe a lot of the people that were not happy with the decisions, the story, everything with the sequel trilogy, episodes 7, 8, and 9. Is this where Disney is going? Are they going to actually commit to something that the fans want that's actually based on legends? Even though, that word alone says everything that hasn't been made by Disney beforehand is now considered legends. And they only, pick and choose bits and pieces of what they want to use. But in terms of, Thrawn, he was the first, I believe he was the first Legends character that was actually brought into canon when he was brought into Season 3 of Rebels. So I'm sure people were thrilled with that. And now that we, are all but confirmed that we will see him in the Ahsoka show, whether it's just from her mentioning his name, to B, these, articles, if they wind up being true, that he's been casted for the show, could this lead to the original Legends Thrawn Trilogy? And I just want to try and talk for a couple of minutes how it could work. So, based on, and keep in mind, I'm only reading the Thrawn Trilogy now. I never read them back in the day or anything. I'm just getting into Legends. Thrawn takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi, approximately. The New Republic is, still trying to, get itself up and running. It's reaching a lot of systems, but the actual government aspect of it is still in very early stages. They're trying to get it started with, characters like Akbar, Mon Mothra. It is Mothma. So yeah, I'm too into I'm too into Godzilla that I just want to be like, oh, it's Mon Mothra, of course. No, Mon Mothma. And Leia, of course. They're like the big three in the book, trying to get the New Republic up and running. But I'm just wondering, could they actually go this route in terms of characters, in terms of story? And can they do it? The answer is yes. Can they do it while still not, quote unquote, interfering or ruining the legacy of the sequel trilogy? Because a lot of people think that with, what we saw in Rebels with the, the weird time portal with Ezra and Ahsoka, people are theorizing now like, whoa, Dave Filoni and Favreau are going to completely eradicate the sequel trilogy. For anyone that, hates the sequel trilogy, you got to admit that's not happening anytime soon. The one positive of the sequel trilogy is that the entire sequel trilogy takes place in less than a year. So you have so much, time to look before that, after that, without it really ever interfering. So this would only take place if they made a Thrawn trilogy, because that's aspect number. Let's start from the beginning. Aspect number one. There have been multiple times that Disney has announced that there would be a trilogy of films that weren't the sequel trilogy. That there would be 3, films that would make up a trilogy, and that was announced after the sequel trilogy was already in place. At one point, it was believed that it would be Dave Benioff and D.B. Weiss from Game of Thrones would do it. At this point in time, the director of Episode 8, Rian Johnson, is, I believe, still supposed to be making his own trilogy, but that's, that first came about in 2016, 2017, before Episode 8 even came out. It was like, yep, he's going to be getting his own unrelated trilogy of films. We're talking years later, and that there's been nothing mentioned about it. I'm going to take the safe assumption that will never happen, but I could be wrong. But I think the best bet would be that you have a trilogy of films that could be done. I mean, at this point, Favreau has really proven himself with the immense, huge success of both seasons of The Mandalorian. And I know moving forward, he's supposed to be running the show Rangers of the New Republic. We're not sure what's going on with that after the firing of Gina Carano. We haven't really heard anything much about that show. It was assumed that Gina was going to be the main character in that show. That's kind of one of the episodes of Mandalorian Season 2 set that up, that someone from the New Republic was, reaching out to her, and she was contemplating getting back into it. So it would have most likely been her getting back into the fold of the New Republic, and she probably would have been the main character. We probably would have had other characters that we know that I'm just not thinking of, along with plenty of other new characters that would have made up the cast of the show. But honestly, from what I can imagine, the loss of Gina Carano was a huge blow to that show, and unless they had already gotten into production, I would not be shocked. I would not be shocked if that show gets scrapped at this point. So, like I was starting to say before, the first possibility that this could be happening is step 1. There is supposed to be a trilogy of movies, in fact, that are supposed to be made at some point in time. Even though this was announced years ago, no one said, hey, we're scrapping those 3 movies. So that's step 1. Step 2, you have plenty of capable directors, whether they be Jon Favreau himself. You could have, Dave Filoni if you want, because he's shown a lot of success with, his projects with, obviously Clone Wars, bringing it back for the final season. Bad Batch is, I would imagine, I don't know what the numbers are, but it seems to be very well received. Rebels, I'm enjoying it. I'm only watching it now, but I'm enjoying it. I think it has a maybe better than 50-50 approval rating. I know it's not poorly reviewed overall, but I don't think it's as treasured as Clone Wars, for example. Obviously, he's going to be working on Ahsoka heavily. He'll be one of the main people running that project. And for years, a lot of people have wanted him to, potentially be the head of Lucasfilm. Even before Kathleen Kennedy was brought on, a lot of people theorized that, hey, George is going to hand over the company to his apparent, heir and successor, which everyone thought was Dave Filoni. And that could still happen. I mean, I don't know where we are with Kathleen Kennedy's, contract as president of the company. I don't think she'll ever really be fired at this point. And I think that's really thanks to the success of, the final season of Clone Wars, Mandalorian, and at the end of the day, even if the projects aren't well received, like the sequel trilogy, those 3 movies made Lucasfilm their money back on their purchase of the product. They bought Lucasfilm for $4 billion. Those movies made at least $4 billion in the box office, all 3 of them. And then, I know it didn't make a lot of money, but the money from Solo and then the money from Rogue One puts them in the positive at that point. So they have really, she has a huge argument to be like, no, I'm good. You're not firing me yet. But I would imagine within the next 2 to 3 years she may step down. I think she's shown what the company's capable of, where it can go, and maybe someone will bring it in a different direction, whether it's better or worse, we don't know yet. But our main thing so far is that we have the people capable of making this trilogy, and that a trilogy was announced to take place. It was never said when it would take place, so that leaves it open for even more speculation. And now our next big thing would be this, if confirmed to be true, announcement of Thrawn actually being casted for live action. There's no way that Star Wars, in my opinion, would go out of their way to make a Thrawn movie trilogy and be like, yeah, we'll just make a movie trilogy animated. Because they've only ever made one animated movie, and it was the Clone Wars movie. And I don't think that really made anything at the box office. I could be wrong, but I'm going to go ahead and say that the movie did not well at all, but the show is obviously well received after its 7 seasons. Over 3 different streaming platforms, Cartoon Network, Netflix, and Disney+. But if this is true that we have an actor for him, that sets up tons of possibilities. Because more than likely, Ahsoka is just the introduction for him to the casual Star Wars fan. If no one has read the 3 different Thrawn book trilogies, because yes, there are 3 different book trilogies for Thrawn, the original being part of Legends, and there are 2 separate book trilogies for Grand Admiral Thrawn that are canon. So even that, they are pumping out content for this character. That is a good chance that they're trying to promote him for something bigger in the future. Just like now they're working hard on their High Republic era, it's only a matter of time before there's a High Republic show and or a movie. It's going to happen eventually, and I am genuinely curious how that works out. But if we have this actor now, that's a huge step. And then I would also say something that only came out in the last couple of days. It's going to sound kind of so bizarre, but it really could help set up the future of this potential trilogy, is the officially licensed Star Wars poster that came out of Comic-Con the other day of Luke Skywalker training Grogu, helping him make his lightsaber, which happens to be with a yellow crystal, which is so freaking cool. I am so curious about that, because when I first saw it, I was like, that is a great, fan art. That is really cool. That's something I would love to see happen, but I know it won't. But the more I was reading about it, it was apparently Lucasfilm, this guy works for Lucasfilm or something. It doesn't officially say Lucasfilm on it or Star Wars on it, but apparently it is an officially licensed poster. So people are theorizing and assuming that it's spoiler territory for whether that winds up being in Mandalorian Season 3, Ahsoka, or if they're going to make a Luke show. Or is this something that we could potentially see in a Thrawn trilogy? And I would not be surprised if we see this in the Thrawn Trilogy, because the Thrawn Trilogy takes place about 5 years or so after Return of the Jedi in Legends, And Mandalorian, I think, is... I forget if it's 3 years, 6 years. It's right in that time frame that, we have seen, obviously, in The Mandalorian. The Empire is still out there. We saw that with the likes of Moff Gideon in the first 2 seasons. The power that he has, even though the Empire isn't in control anymore. I know in Legends that the Empire, after the defeat of the Emperor and at Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star, the Empire kind of fell apart, but they did control parts of the galaxy. I think Disney may have changed that with the whole Battle of Jakku, because that was like the end, and I think that was only maybe a year or 2 after the Emperor was killed. But who's to say they can't write in canon that Thrawn, went into the unknown territory of the galaxy, and he was able to slowly begin to build the Empire back up. Obviously, it would never... at this point, he wouldn't get it to where it was before the Emperor was killed. But, he only needs a fleet or 2, and he can cause a lot of havoc in, parts of the galaxy. So it comes down to... are they committing to Luke Skywalker more than anything? It's just as much, are they committing to getting an actor for Thrawn, and maybe even Ezra? We have one for Ahsoka, and they can kind of tie that in if they want. But are they going to commit to actually using an actor for Luke Skywalker? Because obviously, at the end of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, we had, a stunt double. Or a fill-in actor, and then they CGI'd Mark Hamill's face to make it look like, how Luke would look at that point in time. Now they can just as easily, moving forward, they can probably find an actor that looks even closer to Luke. Maybe they'll stick to the CGI, I don't know. Unfortunately, for some reason Hollywood doesn't want to get into deepfakes, because I've seen fans do deepfakes of that scene, and I've been borderline terrified, because I'm like, that is Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker. I wish that they would make that commitment, even if it quote unquote was like too expensive. They're just afraid. They don't want to admit that technology is out there, because it's better than what they have, and they don't want to go to that level. But if they can commit to an actor for Luke, then it comes down to, where would they go, if at all? Do they bring in new actors for the other main characters? Because at this point, unfortunately, for example, Billy D. Williams, who plays Lando, is too old, unfortunately. He's... not that he's not well, but I believe he's in a wheelchair. I mean, I know they managed to get him, like, standing for his shots in The Rise of Skywalker and stuff, but he's up there in age, which stinks, but that's part of life. Unfortunately, Carrie Fisher is, passed away, and it's already been, a few years since she died, sadly. Harrison Ford, he's in decent shape, but we all know he's never coming back. He only came back to The Force Awakens because he basically said, well, I want this amount of money, and they were like, okay. And he'll never come back. The only one that would ever continue working on it would be Mark Hamill, because he actually voiced young, quote-unquote, young Luke in The Mandalorian, which is really cool. So he's the only one that's always been like, I love Star Wars, I'm committed to it, I'll stay with it forever, yada yada yada. But they would need, someone like that fill-in Mandalorian, they would need a younger actor. I guess in my head, hypothetically, what I'm thinking is, it takes 4 steps for this to work based on, what I've read so far in Heir to the Empire. You would need an actor that looks like Luke, or you do the same thing with Mandalorian where you redo his face. You would need someone for Leia. Now you can either do the deep fake that you did in Rogue One, or I would have no problem with this if they really wanted to, even though it might break the continuity of the fan that likes to critique. You could hypothetically have Billy Lord, Carrie Fisher's daughter, just play Leia. If you want to alter her face or whatever, you can, but I think that would be pretty cool. You'd need someone for Han. Now, it's either A, you bring back the guy that played Han in Solo: A Star Wars Story, or you find someone new. And then the same would go for Lando. You either bring in the actor that played Lando in Solo: A Star Wars Story, or you find someone different that looks like closer to Billy D. Williams would at that age, and the same would go for Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, and Mark Hamill. It could work. Some people might bitch and moan, like, that's not Mark Hamill, that's not Carrie Fisher, they're just, abusing her legacy even though she's dead. No one can complain about Harrison Ford because as much as they would be like, oh, it should be Harrison Ford, we all know he would never do it. So I don't know if they want to go that route. If you're going to do the heir to the Empire, like, Thrawn Trilogy, you would need all those characters again. Obviously, our other characters, R2, it's not a problem, he's just a droid. I'd say Anthony Daniels would have no problem playing 3PO again, even if he decides, hey, I'm just going to voice him, get someone else to stand in there, but he's also pretty petty about it, so he would probably demand to be 3PO, which is kind of cool, kind of annoying. And throughout the sequel trilogy and Solo: A Star Wars Story, we did have a younger actor for Chewbacca, because unfortunately Peter Mayhew died during the sequel trilogy. And he was in shots for The Force Awakens, but he only was in shots where, like, Chewie was either sitting in the cockpit, sitting, in a chair, whatever. If Chewie was running around, it was this new younger guy that plays him. And, if they want to commit to, those 4 characters, it can be done. I guess it would just come down to, can the fans accept that it's no longer, our original 3 actors? But I think it can work if Lucasfilm makes the right story, brings in the right characters and stuff. And I think Thrawn is obviously, getting him in Ahsoka is the right first step. If Lars Mikkelsen and Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau can nail that for him, can show how great of a character he is, especially if they can do it in live action, I think that's where we get our trilogy set from. I would truly love it. They could maybe, do they introduce Mara Jade? I don't know. I don't know if they would really want to commit that far. But there's a lot of ways they can do it. They can change it, to a degree from the Thrawn books back then. And they can still make it fit in. They could, if they really wanted to, they can have, however it ends with Thrawn, that he begins the first stages of the First Order or something like that. They can make it work where they can still, make the company happy, where it's like, look, the sequels are still relevant, we're not getting rid of them, we're not, destroying their legacy. You can better enhance the original trilogy by expanding on those characters and their story, and how we got from there to Episode 7. And maybe we can see the destruction of the Jedi, and maybe we can truly see how, I know in Legends and according to George, Luke was by far the strongest Jedi ever. Maybe we can see, if we see more, of Luke Skywalker, maybe we can see that he's, maybe he was too old. Maybe, he was obviously very capable and very powerful, but maybe he wasn't quite ready. Maybe if he was trained younger by Ben, maybe he could have prevented everything that happened with, with his nephew Ben, with, becoming Kylo Ren, all of that. I think a Thrawn trilogy could both improve on the legacy of the original movies and help bring a new approval of the sequel trilogy. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be like the prequels, where they first came out, they were sadly not well received, but, 10, 15 years later, the sequel trilogy came out, and all of a sudden people are like, damn, those prequels were pretty good, not gonna lie. Hello there, Roger. But maybe that's what they need. Maybe they need to kind of backtrack and help build on how did we get to episode 7. Maybe they can do that and help solidify what it represented, what it was supposed to be, what it could be. They already fell apart in making the 3 movies. They had no continuity. They were all over the place. They were conflicting with each other because the directors had a pissing contest between each other, which is just the pettiest shit ever. Coming from a company, a franchise that big, you'd expect that maybe from a local studio making their, maybe it'd be like, if a movie like Clerks had a Clerks 2, but it was made by a different company. But it was like, whoa, this has nothing to do with it. Something like that. But this is Star Wars. And maybe they can redeem the fact they went into that trilogy without a plan by maybe using The Mandalorian, using potentially the Rangers of the New Republic, Kenobi, Acolyte, whatever they're going to do with Ahsoka and Luke and Grogu. Maybe they can actually redeem the sequel trilogy somehow. All I can say is, if this is true about Lars Mikkelsen, I think we can only look up from here for Star Wars. I think we have a chance of really getting something good moving forward. And at that point, I'm going to give up my argument. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Please leave a like, comment if you have any thoughts on what I said was right, what maybe they could do that I didn't mention. And if you aren't already, please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.